let's take a look at it. This is the broken foot. Oh, look at that, lady.
How does that even happen? Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and this is your #1 source for learning about the unique medical side of the world of sports. In this video, we're going to take a look at 3 of the most infamous injuries in UFC history. We'll look at Jon Jones's fractured toe, Matt Mitrione's swollen eye, and then Tim Sylvia's arm fracture courtesy of Frank Mir. This video is sponsored by Noom. More on them later on, but make sure to check out the link in the description below to take your free 30-second quiz and get started today. As always, if you enjoy learning about this unique side of sports, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit that thumbs up button if you learned something and enjoy the video, and let's get started. This was Jon Jones's repaired left toe after his victory at UFC 259. But what led to this was one of the weirdest things I've seen, especially in terms of a foot injury. It happened just at the end of the fight, and we can see Jones trying to push off the mat with his left foot here. And essentially as he does, it's important to know that he's got his toes kind of curled up a little bit, making them more rigid. And then as he goes to push, boom, right there, his toe just completely snaps into a 90-degree angle, resulting in a dislocation and an open fracture of the toe. The crazy part is he didn't even react to it. He's down here finishing the fight, and at this stage, his toe is just completely obliterated. Afterwards, we saw this kind of makeshift, a little bit of a kind of rigid formed splint on the bottom of his foot. We can see some dressing over that toe with an ice pack on the foot. And then Jones confirmed that it was an open fracture, meaning the bone had broke through the skin. And we saw some updated pictures after it had been repaired. What we're looking at now is a left foot. And the important bones to think of for Jon Jones's injury are going to be the proximal and the distal phalanx. These long bones coming through the middle portion of the foot, those are going to be our metatarsals. And then the bones here out at the end are going to be the phalanges. Our 2nd through 5th have 3 phalanges each, but our big toe, also known as the hallux, only has 2. Based on the location of the sutures, I suspect that Jones had an injury near the interphalangeal joint. The first thing we're going to have covering that's going to be a little bit of a joint capsule, because these are joints just like any other area of our body. If we get rid of that capsule, we can then appreciate that joint. So here between that distal, meaning furthest away toe bone, and then the proximal, meaning closer to the body. We have these little interphalangeal collateral ligaments that support it, kind of like our MCL and our LCL. And so these are probably going to be injured as well to cause that severe amount of dislocation and fracture that resulted in the bone actually coming through the skin. The craziest thing about this is Jones was walking around with an open fracture, getting dirt, bacteria, all kinds of nasty stuff up in there before he got medical attention. With an open fracture, we worry about infections. And so Jones is really lucky that he didn't get a nasty infection in the toe that could have been more detrimental to his UFC career. Now, before we get to our next injury, I want to tell you about the sponsor of today's video. Today's video is sponsored by Noom, a new, different way to get healthy, lose weight, and achieve your goals by using proven psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy practices. What I love about Noom is it isn't just another basic cookie cutter diet app that's going to track your calories and make you feel terrible. It's a much more comprehensive program that's tailored uniquely to you that's really all about just developing a more healthy and holistic lifestyle. They're going to cover all the basics by helping you track your activity and your food intake, but where Noom reaches the next level for me is that it adds this additional psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy approach that really helps you focus more on that mindset. That's probably the hardest thing, in my opinion, to overcome whenever you're trying to get healthier and lose weight. When you log in each day, you're going to be greeted by these daily lessons that are going to give you just short, basic instruction to help you reach these goals. One of them, called Unprocess Your Diet, was really helpful for me to just understand the basics of the benefits of eliminating processed foods from your diet. Take your free 30-second quiz using my link in the description down below to get started today. Right off the bat, they're going to lead you through an online evaluation that's going to make sure that this program is tailored specifically to your own individual goals. So again, head to my link down in the description to take your free 30-second quiz and get started today. Thank you again to Noom for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back to our learning. Next, let's look at Matt Mitrione's eye injury, an image that's one of the most well-known that we've seen in UFC history. This occurred at UFC Fight Night 81, and the exact injury he suffered was, of course, this hematoma, but then also an orbital floor fracture. During the fight, Mitrione fell victim to not 1, but 2 eye pokes before ultimately a hard punch was delivered to that eye. This is going to be the first eye poke.
Here. Yeah, oh, that pinky went right in there, and you see immediately
So right here, we see the result of the pinky from his opponent going into that right eye. Mitrione looks like he's maybe able to close the eyelid to protect the eye a little bit, but here you can clearly see the pinky going into the eye. Now the docs come out and examine him, and thankfully things don't look too bad. I gotta say, this is probably the most impressive eye exam that I've seen a physician do ringside in the sport. The first thing he's doing here is looking with his light to check, of course, pupil response to see if it's reacting to light, look for any bleeding within the eye and other signs of bad injury, but clearly here you can see that Mirone does not have that swelling around his eye. Next thing the doc does here is check for visual acuity, holding up fingers, trying to see if Mirone is able to see visual clarity with that eye. Now Mirone goes back into the fight, but then suffers another eye poke to the same eye, this time from a thumb.
Well, the crowd has just responded, and that is an incredibly obvious thumb in the eye.
So you can see, I mean, yeah, it's super obvious here as he comes in. We can see that left thumb basically go directly right there into Mirone's eye after it's already been poked once. Same thing, you can see the doc here. Now he's checking ocular movements with the different muscles in the eye. Thankfully, the fight continued again, and Mirone's eye didn't look bad either. But then here at the end of the fight was when that traumatic blow was ultimately delivered. Let's look.
Look at this. Boom. Oh, yeah.
Just like.
So that was really the hit where all this damage occurred. If we look at what's going on here, Mirone has a large hematoma beneath his eyelid. This might look ginormous and you'd wonder how in the world can so much fluid be back there, but your skin is actually pretty darn mobile. I mean, I can sit here and I can pull my eyelid and even the skin like above my eyebrow pretty far off my skull. I mean, your skin is pretty mobile. You can really move it around. And so there's a lot of space in there for fluid blood to accumulate and expand, causing a big hematoma like this. He had this drained afterwards to relieve the pressure, but then found out that he had an orbital floor fracture. Again, would have been from that punch. If we look back to our anatomy here, I've got a couple of structures highlighted, and we've got some muscles here that we'll talk about in a bit. But first off, when we hear about an orbital floor fracture, that's really any of the bones that form kind of the orbital wall. This, of course, is going to be the eye socket here. And as you can see, there's a number of different bones that all come together to form that orbital wall. Technically, any of these can be fractured, giving you an orbital floor fracture. When we hear floor, we think probably more the base of the orbital socket. Now, I want to point out some interesting muscular anatomy here because we have all these muscles around the face that you might not really appreciate. The first is the orbicularis oculi. It's this circular muscle that goes all the way around the eye. And what it does when it contracts is it squeezes the eye shut tightly. We then have a muscle that goes back kind of into the eye socket called the levator palpebrae. And what this is going to do is basically elevate or keep the eyelid up. Whenever someone has a damaged nerve to this muscle, you develop something called ptosis, which results in the eyelid basically drooping down. And that's a sign that somebody's had injury to that nerve, and that muscle is going to be weak. Finally, UFC 48, Tim Sylvia and Frank Mir. Let's take a look.
Looking for the arm. He's got a quick submission. Oh, Frank Mir. Oh, God, stop.
Okay, so this was a little bit controversial. The first time we watched this through, it was probably really hard for people to see exactly what had happened. Let's watch it back one more time and see if you can find it.
Quick submission. Oh, Frank Mir.
So it's there, but it's so quick on full-time speed that a lot of the people watching the fight didn't really appreciate it right away. In a later interview with Joe Rogan, Herb Dean actually said that he was worried he was never going to ref again after this because he had sworn that the arm had broken. But then when the doctor came in to check, they basically pointed like it was the shoulder, kind of trying to fool him because Sylvia wanted to keep fighting.
So he misguides her and says, I think he's worried about this. And then she's like, hey, no, nothing's wrong. And I was like, oh, man.
So then thankfully Rogan was watching, of course, and saw the replay, saw the arm break, and alerted everybody, and they stopped the fight. Let's look at this again in slow motion to see where that fracture occurred. Right there. So it's really subtle. But essentially here, Sylvia's in this arm bar, and basically the arm is just a lever. Mir has his wrist and his hand down here, and then the elbow of Sylvia is going to basically be the fulcrum or the pivot point. And because Mir's thigh is on top of the elbow, you basically just get this lever that forms where the center of the elbow is anchored. And so then you're bending the forearm, and this resulted in an ulna and a radius fracture of Sylvia's forearm. And as we play it back through, right there, you can see that little subtle snap, that little kind of deformity right there. And right away, you can see Herb Dean here like, no, stop the fight. His arm is broken. Sylvia suffered a fracture of his radius and ulna, the two bones in the forearm. If we look here, the radius is going to be the bone that sits on the thumb side of the forearm and is bigger up by the wrist. And then the ulna is going to be the bone that sits more on the inside of the forearm and is smaller up at the wrist, but then bigger up at the elbow. So the bump that you feel on the back of your elbow is part of the ulna. It's called the olecranon process, and it's that hard bump here on that ulna. Now, fractures of these bones are typically like any other fracture that we would manage. The biggest thing long-term though, when we talk about functional recovery, especially for an athlete, has to do with the exact angle of the radius whenever you repair it. If you look at this picture, you can tell the radius is not perfectly straight. It's got this little bit of what we call a bow to it. And that radial bow is really important to restore as best as possible when you do a surgery. If that curve isn't properly established, you can get deficits with the rotation of your forearm, where you can have limited range of motion, which of course for a professional athlete can be really damaging. Now that we've seen that anatomy, let's look back at the break one more time.
It rolls over. Take a good look at Tim Sylvia's arm. Right here. Watch this. Pop! What's that?
Yeah.
There's the break. So that's it for the video, everybody. I hope this was educational to take a look back at some of the more infamous injuries in UFC history. Comment below with other ones that you want to see me talk about. We'll put together some more of these compilations so that we can give you a nice variety of different topics to teach and learn about. Let me know, as always, any questions or comments down below. And until next time, I'll see you later.